from Madrid. He's going to give us a talk about similar solutions for the massless Blass-Einstein system.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to visit the Isaac Newton Institute and for giving me the opportunity to talk in this seminar. And I will talk about some family of similar solutions for the Blass-Einstein system, or maybe Einstein-Blass system maybe will be more convenient. Okay, I forgot. Yeah. Okay, it's okay now. Okay, and then let me go on. This is a joint work with Alan Rendell from the Albert Einstein Institute in Golm that belongs to the Max Planck Society. And let me just go on and see what is the subject about. Well, we are concerned about the question of finding solutions of the Einstein equations having some singularity formations. But it is very well known that in the Einstein equations you can have singularity formation. I mean, in the sense that in the case of the Einstein equations you have some manifolds, and then you obtain that the manifolds cannot be continued beyond some certain point. I mean, they are not the thing that is called geodesically complete because some kind of singularity develop. Okay, these are the Einstein equations. The Einstein equations are these equations that I wrote here. R is the curvature tensor of a pseudo-Riemannian manifold with three space dimensions and one time dimension, and these are the Einstein equations that are very well known in relativity. This is the Ricci tensor, and this is the trace of the Ricci tensor. This is the metric, and this is the energy matter tensor. I mean, basically, this part encodes the geometry of the manifold where you are studying the problem, and this part encodes the distribution of matter that you could have in the system. Okay, and it is well known, and it has been proved by different people, that the Einstein equations develop a singularity formation, and that in many cases you cannot extend the manifolds all the time. I mean, the manifolds are not geodesically complete. However, there was some kind of conjecture that was formulated by Roger Penrose. I mean, there are two different variations of this conjecture, but the conjecture was that every time that you have a singularity, you should have something hiding the singularity. I mean, there is something that people in general relativity call the horizons, that basically are surfaces where or regions where the light cannot escape, and since nothing can move faster than light, this will imply that if the singularity is somehow surrounded by one of these horizons, it could then be seen from outside. I mean, one has to be much more precise telling what is this conjecture, but this is basically the idea. The idea of Roger Penrose was that if you had a singularity, there will be a horizon, and therefore this will imply that even if there are singularities, it will then be so bad, because if we stay outside in some safe place outside the singularity, in our nice, more or less flat Minkowski space, the singularity will be invisible for us. However, and then there were some conjectures. I mean, there was a long-standing problem trying to understand if there were the things that were called naked singularities, that were singularities that you could see from outside. I mean, singularities without the formation of the horizon. And then, well, as I will indicate in the next transparency, there are examples of naked singularities. I mean, now it is known that there are naked singularities. But on the other hand, then it was conjectured that maybe these singularities were unstable, and this explains why the people talk very often about the weak cosmic censorship hypothesis and the strong cosmic censorship hypothesis. I mean, this hypothesis that the singularity formation will be always followed by the formation of a horizon hiding the singularity was the thing that was called the strong cosmic censorship hypothesis. And the weak cosmic censorship hypothesis will say that even if these singularities can arise, maybe all of them are unstable, and the slight perturbations of the space-time or the matter will destroy them. In any case, as I was telling, I mean, these equations are nonlinear, and then they have many possibilities to create singularities. And there are some examples of naked singularities. I mean, singularities that are formed without the formation of horizons. The proof of these results for the thing that is called, for the matter that is called the scalar field. I mean, the problem with Einstein equations is that here in this side you can put many things. In this side here you can put many different fields, but one that is very popular is to put the thing that the physicists call the scalar field, that is just the wave equation coupled with the gravitation. And then Christodoulou was able to prove that for the scalar field there exist solutions that form naked singularities, but they are non-generic. I mean, if you make some perturbation of them, they can be destroyed. I mean, the things are a bit subtle because the perturbation is made in a rather strong topology, as we will say in our language. They are made in the class of manifold C1, if I remember correctly. But in any case, in some sense, these singularities, I mean, they exist, but at least they seem to be unstable in some suitable sense. Well, these were not the first results about the existence of naked singularities. Probably the first results were obtained by Choptwig, and who wrote some very interesting papers, because he obtained the existence of some very nice oscillatory cell-similar solutions. I mean, as I will indicate in a minute, if you try to obtain naked singularities, the thing that you try to do immediately is try to write everything in cell-similar variables. However, at least for the scalar field, the people were not able to find cell-similar solutions in the classical sense that normally we understand. I mean, a solution that's written in cell-similar variables will be stationary. But the thing that Choptwig found is that there were some very nice solutions that were oscillatory, they were oscillating all the time. I mean, and they were periodic, they were completely periodic, but written in the cell-similar time of variables. I mean, in the cell-similar time scale. Everything was numerical. I mean, the Choptwig really managed. I mean, this project has a lot of work, because it's not easy at all to guess in which region you are going to find the parameters that you have to tune in order to get this kind of oscillatory behavior. I mean, one of the difficulties in general relativity with these numerical simulations is that it is not easy at all to guess in which region you have to obtain the singularity, or where you are going to obtain something looking like the singularity. And in any case, the work by Choptwig generated a lot of additional work by many people later, and now there is a whole area of general relativity that I will call the area of critical collapse, and that basically consists in trying to analyze the transition regimes between the singularity that in some sense looks stable in general relativity, that is the formation of a black hole or a horizon. I mean, a singularity that is really hiding what is happening at the interior, and singularities that are in some sense much weaker. I mean, somehow these critical collapse cases were the transition between black hole and absence of singularities. I mean, if you put the matter, you can think in a very intuitive way. I mean, this is very rough, but you can think in that way. If you have a lot of matter very much concentrated, then you create a black hole. If you have something that is very spread, or the matter is very spread, or you have very little matter, then somehow it diffuses and it moves to infinity, and somehow the critical collapse consists in finding what do you have in the middle. I mean, in some sense, it's the type of critical phenomenon that you try to find. And the main interest, as I said before, I mean, it's not for understanding this critical collapse, because I mean, in principle, one would expect this to be unstable, although it is not so clear in the case of Blasov-Einstein. One would expect this to be unstable, but the real difficulty is that this could provide examples of naked singularities, and the question of the stability is not so obvious, because these equations are very different from many of the equations that at least I am used to study, like parabolic equations or another kind of examples, where these transitions really are something that are going to be unstable in all the cases. Here it depends very much on how you make the perturbations, the topology, and another type of considerations. In any case, I mean, this is more or less the picture that you can find concerning the cosmic censorship hypothesis. Okay, now let me go to the mathematical problem. The mathematical problem is the following. Well, first of all, most of the studies, maybe not all of, but most of the studies concerning Blasov-Einstein equations and singularity formation have been made I mean, not always, but in many cases, this has been made in the thing that is called in a spherical symmetric problem. I mean, under the assumption of a spherical symmetry. Because I mean, otherwise the relativity equations, the Einstein equations, are extremely difficult. They are some kind of wave-like equations, but very nonlinear, and they produce radiational gravitation and many of these very nasty things that are difficult to analyze. Although there are here some people who are expert in this field, but these kind of questions are much more difficult to study. And then very often, many of these researches have been made in the radially symmetric case. Well, I am writing this in the thing that are called the Schwarzschild coordinates. Well, more or less, there is a little modification concerning the time, but it's not important. I mean, in the Schwarzschild coordinates, you have the sun radial coordinate, that is the sun R is a coordinate that measures basically how much area do you have hidden in a given sphere, and these are more or less standard spherical coordinates, the coordinate theta and the coordinate phi. And then, I mean, one has to be careful, because here these letters do not always mean distance, and I mean, in the case of the distance could be okay, but in the case of the time, one has to be careful, because many of these magnitudes are not exactly velocities or the type of things that we are normally used to that. But because, I mean, this is a typical thing in general relativity, that the coordinates are just some coordinates that then can behave in a very strange manner, because the space matter is stretched, and everything gets rather counterintuitive in many cases. But in the case of Blasov-Einstein, the thing that it is assuming, I mean, the metric will have this structure. The gravitation will be just in these two functions. These two functions, mu and lambda, are going to give the behavior of the gravitational field, and the function f is just the typical it's the same as in Blasov-Poisson. I mean, it's just the distribution of particles in the phase space. And under these symmetry assumptions, the phase space has relatively few coordinates. There is a radius, there is this kind of radial velocity, or something looking or behaving. It's not exactly the radial velocity, but it's something that one can think like radial velocity, even if it is not so. This is the angular momentum, or the square the angular momentum, and this is some kind of local time. With the normalization that I will use, this local time is the time at the center. I mean, if you put a clock in the center and you just see what the clock is indicating, this will be the t that we have here. But one has to be careful because in general relativity, the clocks in different places will move at different speeds. But in any case, this is the density function in the phase space. The typical thing that you find in Blasov-Poisson. Okay, and then you have to write the Einstein equations. Luckily for us, this was already made by Gerhard Rhein very much in detail, and this is something that you can find in the habilitation thesis of Gerhard Rhein. The Blasov-Einstein systems, under all these assumptions of symmetry, becomes this PD. This is something looking very much like the Blasov-Poisson equation. It's just more nonlinear and with more structure, but it's the same type of thing. There is something that I will call the energy, that is just this quantity here. These two things are the gravitational fields. These are the two gravitational fields. And this is something that is called the density, and this is the pressure associated to the matter. Okay, concerning the gravitational fields, they are different from Poisson. Of course, they are different from the Poisson equation. You have two instead of one, but they are not so bad. I mean, these equations are nonlinear, but luckily in the radially symmetric case, the things do not look so different from the classical Poisson equation. I mean, of course, it's much more linear. There are many more complications, but in principle, the equations for the gravitational fields look very static. There are no waves, and this is important because to have waves, you need to have some quadrupolar structures. Otherwise, you don't get waves in general relativity. And from this point of view, they are not going to be so bad. And in practice, they are going to behave very much like in Blasov-Poisson, although of course with many more nonlinearities and many more technical complications. Well, this is just a normalization condition. For lambda 0, you have to impose this condition, lambda 0 equal to 0, lambda infinity equal to 0. It's just to see how is the metric. Well, actually, this will not be satisfied for this solution, as I will indicate now, but this is due to the fact that the solution is not matching with the flat space at infinity. And this is just the normalization of the time. This just says the thing that I said before, that if you have a clock in the center, the t is the time that the clock is indicating. Okay, then our goal was try to construct self-similar solutions for this system, generating singularities without formation of horizons. I mean, if you begin thinking about the problem, if you want to obtain something without formation of horizon, you need to have zero mass. You need to have zero mass. And then you begin doing the typical dimensional analysis, rescaling, and these kind of things, and then very quickly you get the conclusion that this should look like a self-similar solution or something close or not very far away from a self-similar solution. And then this is the thing that we were trying to do, and the thing that I will discuss during this talk. Well, let me just mention some previous work that has been made in gravitation. Well, this is not completely correct. This is this is relativistic gravitation. The gravitation, okay, some of the things are relativistic, but the gravitation will be non-relativistic. There are the well-known results by Pfaffel-Moser and Lyons-Pertam showing the absence of singularities for the Blasov-Poisson system in 3 dimensions. There are also some results by Lemou, Mehaz, and Raphael showing that for the Blasov-Poisson equation relativistic, in spatial dimension 3, there exists a self-similar solution. There are self-similar solutions in these cases, but here the gravitation is, I mean, in some sense, is still non-relativistic in some sense, even if the equations for the energies and for the motion of the particles are relativistic. And finally, there are Gundlach and José María Martín García also did some analysis of self-similar solutions for the Blasov-Einstein equation, and I will discuss this very much in detail later because they obtained also some solutions, but they are very different from the ones that we got, and I will try to explain what are the differences between their solutions and our solutions, the solutions obtained by Gundlach and Martín García. Okay, well, we need we want to obtain self-similar solutions, and this means that we have to have a rescaling symmetry group. Well, the Blasov-Einstein equations have a symmetry, as written before, have a symmetry group with one parameter. However, there is a problem, is that we don't want to use any rescaling group, but we would like to use a rescaling group that is preserving the f along the trajectories. I mean, the function f, the density of particles in the phase space, is preserved along trajectories. And then we should make rescalings that preserve this property. And this is one of the main differences, actually the main difference with the work of Gundlach and Martín García. That with our choice of the density in the phase space, or the choice of f that we are using, we are not rescaling it. But if you do that, the energy is incompatible with the rescaling group. But on the other hand, we are trying to see what happens near a singularity. Near a singularity, this velocity should be very large, this omega should be very large, and also the r should be very, very small. And therefore, these two terms are expected to be much bigger than this one that we have here, and then it is natural, at least as a first approximation, to neglect this, although this is something that we would like to understand in the future. I mean, to see what is the little effect of these terms, but at least the experience that I had in another singularity formation problems tell me that these type of things are normally completely irrelevant and they don't play any role at all. I mean, and then the one approximation will be to assume that the energy is approximated in this particular way. That just means to ignore completely the mass of the particle and to assume that most of the energy of the particle is just the kinetic energy of the particle. This is the main contribution to the energy of the system. And this is the thing that we are going to call the massless Blasov-Einstein system. I mean, it just consists in replacing the energy function that we had before by something like this. Okay, now I can show you the rescaling group. This is the rescaling group that we are using to build similar solutions. I mean, the radius r will be transformed to sin theta of r, the t will become theta t, the velocity has to be rescaled in this way, the angular momentum will rescale in this form, and as I said before, and this is the crucial thing, the f is going to be preserved along characteristics, because of course we want to obtain a solution that is starting initially as something smooth, where the f should be of order 1, and should remain of order 1 until the singularity, because it is transported along the characteristics. And then there is no way of doing something else. I mean, if you try to do something different, you are going to get some strange solution, like the ones that I will describe later by Gunnar and Martin Garcia. But in any case, I mean, this is a natural thing that you have to do in the rescaling. I mean, this imposes a constraint in the type of rescalers that you can do. Okay, and then, well, as usual in general relativity, very often it's better to use some variables instead of others, and we found that was very convenient, as I will show in the next transparencies, to replace this function omega that was more or less the radial velocity by some kind of rescale version eliminating the angular momentum. And then this variable is going to be better in order to handle the equations, as I will show in a couple of transparencies. Okay, then if you use this system of variables, then the equations become something like this. Well, sorry, this W is a V. This W I didn't see that. This W is a V, but the rest is okay. And this is the system, the mathematical system that now we want to understand. I mean, this is this kind of Blasov, stress Blasov-Einstein, the new formula for the energy, the gravitational equations, and the densities for the pressure for the matter that are given by these integral terms. All right, and then in these new variables, well, as I said, there is something interesting in this system, and this is the reason for making this change of variables. I mean, the reason for making this is that in this new system, the f disappears basically from everywhere. I mean, the f is not going to play any role in the evolution, and everything, I mean, in particular here, everything depends only on the integral of f, little f, capital F, little f, capital F. And I mean, and then this is going to simplify very much the things because it allows us to reduce the number of variables by one. If you do that, I mean, you notice immediately that the gravitational field depends on the distribution of particles only by means of this quantity that we can call zeta, and then we can replace the previous system of equations by a system of equations for a variable with less dependencies. I mean, it's going to be a variable depending on one function less. I mean, the angular momentum is going to disappear. Well, something that I would like to comment is that in this equation you see that there is not any term giving a change of the angular momentum, because of course the angular momentum is conserved. This is one of the good things about this set of variables, that the angular momentum is conserved and then the derivatives on f disappear, and and the angle does not appear either because the system is rotationally symmetric. I mean, the coordinates theta, the angular coordinates, do not appear because the system is rotationally symmetric, and then it has a rather nice structure from this point of view. Okay, now we look for similar solutions, and then you do the rescalings that one expects to do. I mean, I just change the f by a new function capital G, the r will become y, the velocity v will be little v will become capital B, the angular momentum f will become phi, and the fields will be the mu will be u, and lambda will be capital lambda. I mean, this is the set of similar variables that we are going to use, and the rescaling is going this way. I mean, if you see how the things should be, if you want to look for something that is invariant under the previous rescaling group, the rescaling group tells you that you should have this kind of dependence on the variables. I mean, it's the standard thing of similar solutions, but for this problem. Okay, and then you get a new system of equations. You obtain this that the previous Blasov-Einstein system becomes this. The equations for the gravitational fields do not change at all. I mean, and this is important because as soon as the gravitational fields becomes bigger than some number of order 1, you get formation of horizons, and then this means that you should do the rescalings in such a way that the gravitational fields do not change. I mean, the gravitational fields in the singularity should be something of order 1 and should be kept as something that remains of order 1. And these are now the rescale densities. I mean, in these coordinates, these are the new rescale densities. Okay, now the funny thing is that in this system can be integrated at least formally in a more or less explicit manner if you know the potentials, because the Einstein equations are not any equation. I mean, the Einstein equations have a lot of structure, and in particular there is a lot of Hamiltonian structure underlying everything. And well, first of all, the function g that we have here is constant along characteristics. This is obvious from this equation. The g that is the new distribution function in self-similar variables will be a constant function along characteristics. And the characteristics have a very nice Hamiltonian structure. Well, there is this little factor, but this is just due to the fact that the original system of coordinates was not a canonical transformation, but it's not a series problem. I mean, this is basically even it's a Hamiltonian system. And if you write the things in the right way, this is a Hamiltonian system, and this is the Hamiltonian that you have to use there. I mean, this is something very nice because, of course, as you can imagine, this makes the life much easier. And then this means that the trajectories for this system are going to be contained in the level lines of the Hamiltonian H. Of course, the problem is that we don't know the fields, and the coupling is coming because the field E capital U and the field lambda depend in a very complicated manner on the structure of the densities, and the densities depend in a very complicated manner on the structure of the trajectories. I mean, you have the trajectories are going to give you the densities, now you have to solve the equations, and from here you get the lambda. I mean, and then the problem is awfully nonlinear, and there is no hope that one can find an explicit solution in that particular way. But in any case, the interesting thing is that there is a nice Hamiltonian, and of course we have used this very much because this allows us to compute formulas for the positions of the characteristics. Well, and as I said before, it's better to use not the function f, but the function g. No, sorry, not the function f, but the function theta that in self-similar variables can be rescaled in this manner. I mean, the function theta, I remind you, that was this. It was the integral of the angular momentum, the integral multiplied by the angular momentum was this function, and this is the function theta, and in self-similar variables we are writing this using this theta function, this capital theta function here, with this particular rescaling. Okay, and then this is the problem now. I mean, the problem now, if you assume that you can integrate everything and that the characteristics can be integrated, for this system of variables becomes that. The previous blast of equation now is only this along characteristics. Sigma is the parameter parameterizing the evolution along the characteristics. Sigma is now the parameter that tells us how is going to be the evolution along the characteristics. These are the densities, these are the pressure, and this is the Hamiltonian, and these are the gravitational fields, and this is the formula for the energy. Basically, the mathematical problem is something like that at this stage. Okay, and then, but still this problem is complicated, and something that we found is that you can make life easier if you look for things that are very much concentrated near specific characteristic curves. I mean, so far the problem is complicated because, of course, you have many characteristics. I mean, maybe it's better if I try to make a plot. I mean, you have something like this. This is a phase plane that is something like capital Y, capital B, and here you have many trajectories that corresponds to this Hamiltonian. But of course, the shape of these trajectories depend on how are the fields, and you cannot compute these trajectories until you know the fields. But on the other hand, you have the coupling, through these integrals, because until you know the trajectories, you cannot compute these integrals, and then the system is somehow close. But the thing that we notice is that the system becomes much nicer, or at least there is something where we can do analysis, if we look for solutions that are concentrated along one of the characteristics. I mean, if we try to obtain something that is concentrated along one specific characteristic. And then, I mean, we went in a very radical way. We went just to look for solutions that are concentrated in particular hypersurfaces of the phase plane. I mean, we tried to obtain something that was concentrated in specific hypersurfaces. I mean, in other words, we look for functions g that are a function a multiplied by times the Dirac mass, and since the characteristics are preserved along the evolution, the Dirac mass should be a Dirac mass for the difference between the Hamiltonian and some given level line. I mean, this is a function. This will be a measure concentrated along the level lines. It's just a measure concentrated along one of the level lines. And then life, as I will show in a minute, will become much easier. I mean, at least there will be something that we can handle in an analytical way. Then the function theta that was the integral of this with respect to the angular momentum is something like this. And this function beta is now easy to compute. If we go to the equations, the function beta is going to grow exponentially in terms of the parameter sigma that is parameterizing the characteristic curves. And I mean, these are the level lines that we will assume that are made of two branches, and of course we will prove that. Initially, I will assume that these level lines are made of two branches, v equal to v1 of y and v equal to v2 of y, and we will prove later. I mean, the part of the result, of course, will be to show that the level lines really have this kind of structure. I mean, let me precise this. The thing that this means is that we will assume in this picture that everything is concentrated along two curves. That will be, this one will be v2 of y. No, this is not starting here. This is starting at negative values. I mean, this will be some value y0. Then this will come here. This will come here. And well, and here something will happen, but this we will see in a minute. Okay, this will be the v2 of y. This will be the v2 of y, and this should be the V1 of y. I mean, we will make the assumption that the characteristic curve is concentrated in a region looking like this. I mean, why do we make this assumption? Well, we make this assumption because if you begin, I mean, the first thing that you do if you have a system like this is try to integrate the system in the absence of fields. I mean, if you drop completely the gravitational fields, I mean, you just assume that this is 1 and this is 1 and you ignore completely the gravitational fields, then it's interesting to see how are the trajectories in this picture. I mean, physically they are obvious. Physically, you don't have gravitational fields, they are moving in straight lines. But in these coordinates, they become something complicated. And the thing that they become in this picture is something like this. I mean, there are some curves coming from here. Let me just draw in this way. There are some curves coming from here, then something like here, and then something like this and this and this. I mean, the straight lines for the trajectories in this picture become something like that. But and then this was a bit the motivation for looking for solutions, having this structure of two branches in the function b, because I mean, at least in the absence of mass, you have this type of structure, and then it will not be so crazy to look for this kind of solutions. Of course, we have proved that this is actually the fact, that the solutions are going to have global solutions behaving exactly in this way, behaving in this particular way. But this was the motivation for looking for functions with this type of structural branches. Okay, now let me go. What happened here? I probably just push OK. Okay, well then let me discuss a little bit about dust solutions and about dispersive solutions. Dust is a controversial issue in general relativity because there have been a lot of problems, a lot of difficulties whenever people try to obtain solutions that were concentrated in particular surfaces. I mean, there is a whole field of people in general relativity studying the things that are called dust solutions, not dust-like but dust solutions. And we try to make the difference between dust solutions and dust-like solutions for the reasons that I will explain now. Okay, dust solutions are solutions of the equations that in principle should have some kind of restriction on how dispersed could be the space of velocities at any given point. I mean, for instance, one typical assumption that, as many people here now will simplify a lot the analysis of the Blasov equations, will be, for instance, to assume that at a given point y, there is only one possible value of the velocity. I mean, along a given characteristic, there is only one value for the velocity. I mean, to assume that there is a Dirac mass placed at a given position, or only a single angular momentum for a single position, because then this equation becomes a much nicer hydrodynamic equation that you can try to understand in detail, and where you can do many more computations. However, there have been many papers and there are many papers in the general relativity concerning dust solutions, and they have the problem that very often they find singularities that are a bit artificial. I mean, the problem with dust solutions is that you can create very easily singularities, for instance, due to the phenomenon that is called cell crossing. That is something like this. I mean, you assume that you have in a space R, you have a density where at each point you have a velocity, and suppose that you have here faster velocities than here. I mean, suppose that the particles here are moving faster than the particles here. Then this thing could come together to this point, and this produces some distribution in this space of velocities radius like that, and this gives a singularity. And very often these singularities have been mixed with the true singularities of general relativity. I mean, in general relativity, and this is not really a singularity for general relativity, this is just a singularity for the model of matter that you are using. But it's not a true singularity for the Einstein equations, because nothing is really happening with the curvatures or with anything like that. And there have been many difficulties and many problems and many controversies related to this kind of dust solutions. For instance, if the trajectories arrive to the origin and you don't study the continuation of the trajectory later, or many other problems like that. And this was one of the reasons, because one has to be careful if one is studying in general relativity solutions concentrated in mesos. I mean, one has to be careful with this point, and this is a point where we try to be particularly careful. I mean, one of the things that makes this story so complicated is that if you formulate everything in PDEs as we are doing here, the things are not so bad. But very often in the studies of general relativity, the people begin with a metric, and then the model of matter is imposed later, and then you don't really have a so clean system of equations. I mean, the people use these very nice tricks that are available in general relativity of combining the geometry or the symmetries of the system, and then you don't see really what is really happening with the trajectories. It's something that you see much more clearly if you have the system of partial differential equations. But the point is that there have been a lot of controversies and a lot of false singularities found in general relativity due to this type of dust analysis. And this was the reason because we wanted to be very careful with this kind of solutions concentrated in Dirac masses. I mean, the thing that I will call normally a fully dispersive solution is a solution that, where in this case, is supported in a set of variables that is as wide as the whole phase space. And in this reduced problem with this symmetry, the solution should be concentrated in the whole space y, b, phi. Well, we are going to examine, and the solutions that I am going to describe here are the things that I am going to call dust-like solutions, that will be solutions supported in manifolds with a smaller dimension than the dimension of the phase space. They will be concentrated precisely in manifolds with codimension 1, as I will show in a minute. They will be concentrated in manifolds of codimension 1. And this will be two-dimensional surfaces. In this phase space, they will be concentrated in two-dimensional surfaces. But this is one of the things that I think that have to be studied. We believe that these solutions can be transformed in fully dispersive solutions. If you prefer in another way, we believe that there is continuity for these equations in the set of measures, and we have some results indicating that. But I will concentrate only to describe this kind of dust-like solutions that are concentrated in some two-dimensional manifolds. But I think that they are very good candidates to obtain truly similar solutions having a full dispersion, if you are willing to do the analysis that you have to do there in order to show that the measures are changing in a continuous manner. And therefore, if you have something very much aggregated in the surface, that evolution is going to be very much the same. I will say something about that at the end. Okay, then for dust-like solutions, the thing is very nice for this type of dust-like solutions. Because then the solutions are going to be concentrated in a curve like this. They will be in a curve in two curves like this. In something like this. In some curves like that. And for these solutions, you can begin doing changes of variables and little tricks, and the system reduces to a system of 4 ordinary differential equations. The system will be just a system of 4 ordinary differential equations, and this is something where in principle you can do many more things. These are the gravitational fields, the two equations above. Now, the sigma is just the parameter along each of the curves. For instance, sigma is the parameter that is parameterizing the curves, and it turns out that it's much better to use it as independent variable. This will be the sigma 2, and this will be the sigma 1. This will be the sigma 1 and the sigma 2 respectively. This is the parameter that is going to parameterize the two curves, but instead of parameterizing the v as a function of y, we have found that it's much more convenient to parameterize the sigma by y. And y is the independent variable then. The distance to this point is going to be the independent variable. The horizontal distance will be the independent variable for the system. And then the densities, you can compute these ugly integrals that we had before. You take the integrals, and then you can compute everything for these distributions. And the integrals look like something like this. The two integrals for the densities now become these objects, and they are just functions of the sigmas, the fields, and the velocities, and all these kind of things. For these v's and y's, for y is independent variable. V, the velocity has to be computed using the Hamiltonian. The v can be computed in a not very difficult way, just using this equation. The v is just the solution of this equation for the given value of h that we are considering. And then, in principle, it's a system of ODEs. The advantage is that now this is a nice system of ODEs. And then, you begin playing with this, you begin playing with the system of equations and try to see if there is a solution like the one that we would like to have. And something that you see very quickly is that there is some kind of a square root singularity. There is some kind of a square root singularity here. I suspect that this is not very well written. No, this is not well written. This square root should be up. Sorry, this square root should be up here. The thing that you find, the thing that you find is that the functions v begin here like a square root. They begin here like a square root. These functions begin like square roots. You will tell me, okay, this is obvious because if you look at the equation from here, this will be a square, but this is not true because the constants are different. Here you have a constant c2 of y minus y0, and this is a constant k1 of y minus y0. The constants are different. The constant k2 and k1 are different. This curve does not have a well-defined curvature. There is a discontinuity of the curvature at this particular point if you see it from this particular side. But in any case, in principle, you can compute these things. And after you compute these asymptotics near this point, the point y0 is the point where the trajectory is beginning. Y0 is just the point where we are beginning to put mass. We assume that the space is empty from the center until this specific point, and here we begin putting mass. Here at this point we begin putting mass because here there is nothing. The trajectory did not arrive, and then there is nothing here. And finally, well, if you do this, you can also obtain asymptotics for the gravitational fields and for the density. Here I made a mistake because the thing that behaves like a 1 over the square root is the density. The density of the particles, the density and the pressure, both of them behave like 1 over the square root. Okay, these square roots gave us some problems, and I will come back to this in a bit later. But in any case, the thing is that this is the asymptotics that at least formally you can obtain for this system of differential equations, and you can construct solutions like that. I will go back to this point in a few minutes. But the first thing that we did was to take these equations with these asymptotics near the point where we are beginning to put matter, and to put them in a computer. Just to see how the solutions look, because you have 4 horrible equations and you try to see what is going to happen with them. And then we found that there were 2 different behaviors. Well, this is a bit exaggerated. This is not arriving to the origin, but the problem is that this axis is very large. And then in reality, there is a minimum at a positive value of y. This is y, exactly the same as here. This is y, and this is b. This is b, and the trajectory is beginning at some positive value of y, at some positive value of y0 that I think that is 0.3 or something like that in this particular example. Okay, but then if the mass that you put in the system is small, I mean, let me go to the first question of the mass. In the system, we have a constant that is this beta 0. This beta 0 is related to the amount of mass that we are putting in our trajectory. This beta 0 is basically some kind of density over the Dirac mass at this point, at the point where we are beginning to put mass. It's the free parameter that we have in the whole system. This is the amount of mass that we are putting when we begin putting mass here. I mean, the density at this particular point. And then it shows up in the equations, of course, beta 0 is here. And depending on the value of beta 0, you obtain that the pictures have one shape or something completely different. I mean, this is for beta 0 small. This is a picture that you obtain if the amount of mass that you are putting in your trajectory is sufficiently small. And it is not surprising because, as I said you, if there is no mass at all, the trajectories look like this. Well, and this, I mean, it's different, but it's not so different. I mean, the thing is looking like that. I mean, now it's more complicated. There is some curvature here. If the mass is 0, you get exactly something like that. But if the mass is small, you get something that, okay, there is a deformation because here the space-time is going to be deformed. But at the end, the solution looks very much like the solutions that you have for free particles. I mean, for particles without any gravitational field. Now, suppose that you put a lot of mass in the trajectory. Well, if you put a lot of mass in the trajectory, you get something like this. The trajectory is closed down. And this gives a discontinuity because this trajectory is producing a discontinuity in the parameter sigma, and nothing that was made before makes sense. The whole analysis breaks down, and you cannot go in this way. But it's clear that there is some transition in the behavior. I mean, it's clear from this picture that something is changing. And of course, it's the thing that you can see trying to tune carefully the parameter. If you try to tune carefully the parameter beta 0, if you try to adjust the amount of mass that you are putting in the trajectory, you get that the thing looks like this. I mean, this is adjusting very, very carefully and in a very refined way the amount of mass that you are putting in the trajectory. And then, I mean, it looks like something that is trying to go to infinity. I mean, formally, of course, you can compute asymptotics and it seems to be okay, but now I will go to the rigorous proof of this. I mean, but this is the thing that you see after putting this in a computer and looking how the trajectory looks. The only thing that we do here is to integrate all this. Okay. But we can prove this rigorously. I mean, we can prove this, and this is the result. The result that we obtain is that if we assume that the y0 is sufficiently small, I mean, if we begin putting the mass in a region that is close to the origin, there is a critical value. I mean, if you go very far away, the numerical pictures look different, and then y0 should be small. We don't know how much, but y0 should be small. I mean, you have to begin putting mass close to the origin. If you begin putting mass close to the origin, there exists a number beta 0, such that the solution of the previous system with the conditions of the square roots and the singularities that I said at the origin are defined for all positive values, and we can compute the asymptotics of all the trajectories and all the solutions in the different regions. Okay, let me just here. This goes more for the experts in general relativity. What is here? You can see the fingerprint of some kind of singularity, in particular in this type of growth here, because remember that the u was the field mu. It's the one associated to the time trajectory. Something that is well known is that and this has been seen numerically and now also analytically, is that if you have a black hole, and this is for instance R, and you try to plot how is the function mu or u in this case, and there is something like that. I mean, this is the region where the horizon is formed, and then suppose that here mu goes more or less like 0, and then here it goes down, and it does something like that. I mean, it does something like that. Well, this means that at least in this time scale with this Schwarzschild coordinate, this means that the time inside the black hole is running much more slowly. I mean, we cannot see it. I mean, we cannot see really what is going on with the inside the black hole, and this is the meaning of that. And then, of course, in this case, the situation is different because the thing that is happening is that this is growing linearly. I mean, this function is growing in a linear way. It's not doing this. It's doing something like this. It's doing something like this. But it's telling that the time near the singularity, that is the region here, is running much more slowly than the time far away. The time here is running much more slowly than the time that you have far away. And then, but somehow it's happening in a way that is much less dramatic than for the black holes. In the black holes, you really have that the time here is, I mean, it's stopping basically. Here is a bit different, but you have that at infinity the time is moving at a much faster speed. I mean, this is the thing that you can see basically in this logarithmic behavior that you have here. And this is just telling you how is the distribution of the masses in the different regions for the entering particles and for the incoming particles and for the outgoing particles in this particular part. Okay, well, how do you do the proof of this? Well, the idea is to reduce everything to an autonomous system, and then first you do some change of coordinates. You just it's very convenient to absorb the y0 where we are starting inside the change of variables. and then and to define a new set of variables. I mean, we define a new variable zeta, a new variable q, and then the system becomes a bit nicer. And this is the system. I mean, just a system for q, for lambda, and for u, where the zeta is given by the roots of this equation. There are two roots, and the roots are going to be brought here. And these are the initial conditions that you have to impose. The gravitational fields are 0 at the interior, because since there is no matter, there is no gravitational field, and these functions have to be normalized to 1. Okay, now I go back to the square root. As I said before, there is a square root singularity at the point where you begin the solution. But this square root singularity is very, I mean, it gave a lot of problems. We were able to prove by means of direct contrastive arguments and these kind of things that there exist solutions of this type. But then we found that the singularity can be eliminated, and there is and after you play a lot with the equation at the end, you see these kind of things. It is convenient to make this change of variables. There is a change of variables like that, and it is convenient also to transform the times and to transform the different things. And after doing these changes of variables, you can end up with a system like this. Well, this function theta is a function that is difficult to write in less than one transparency, but it doesn't matter. The thing that matters is it is analytic. I mean, it is an analytic function, in particular near this point, but in general. I mean, it's a function that behaves rather well. It's an ugly function, but it behaves rather well. And then somehow in this way we eliminate the singularity. I mean, doing this type of transformations, you can remove completely the singularity. I mean, you can eliminate completely the singularity of the system, and you end up with a system of equations that is very nice near the critical point. Now, the point where you are beginning, I mean, this point here with the 0 fields becomes this point here, but this system of equations is nice near that point. And then you can prove existence and uniqueness of solutions just with the classical ODE type of arguments. And all the structure of square roots is encoded here. And then all the structure of square roots and all the ugly things go to this square root that you have on the top. And okay, now the thing that we try to do is try to plot the trajectories of this system, of this four-dimensional system. Here I made, this is Q2 zeta 2, this is Q2 zeta 2, of course. Well, now the thing that we do is try to study the trajectories of this system, of this four-dimensional system, and try to see in detail what happens with the trajectory beginning to this point and eventually going somewhere. Well, we can see that the asymptotics that we expect to have here is just the approach to some equilibrium point for this system of coordinates. There is a nice equilibrium point in this four-dimensional system that will be the one giving the asymptotic behavior that we have obtained in all this region. And in the case of y0 small, as I said, there is a critical value for y0, but for y0 small, we can approximate, I mean, we can do a lot of analysis with this system of equations. I mean, there is this point is an unstable point. I mean, this equilibrium point is unstable for this system of equations, and it has a three-dimensional stable manifold. I mean, there is the codimension of the stable manifold is 1. I mean, there is a three-dimensional stable manifold and one wrong direction, one unstable direction for it. But we can approximate rather well the whole stable manifold in the limit of small y0. If y0 is sufficiently small, we can approximate everything. And then the idea is to do some kind of shooting argument. Well, in this system of coordinates, the previous beta 0, the amount of mass that we are putting into the system, becomes this number theta. I mean, this is the mass. Theta is now the mass. Theta is just the mass that we are putting into the trajectory, and this is the number that is coming here in different places. I mean, this number appears in many places. And then the thing that we do is just to adjust the theta. It's just a typical shooting argument. The only problem is that it's a shooting argument in a four-dimensional space. But it's basically a shooting argument. We just change the value of theta, and we move the value of theta in order to show that the trajectory beginning at this particular point approaches to this particular point. I mean, let's just count dimensions. I mean, you have 4 dimensions. I mean, I try to plot this. This is 4 dimensions. There is a starting point here. There is an equilibrium point more or less here. There is a 3-dimensional manifold that is supposed to be this, and the goal is to show that this belongs here. This is the thing that we do in reality. And then, okay, now, well, I try to show some pictures, but this is more or less the thing that I was trying to plot here. These are the two functions q. I mean, this picture is 4-dimensional, or it's trying to be 4-dimensional. This is q1, q2, this is another coordinate, and this is another coordinate. There is an equilibrium here, and I mean, after one of these changes of variables, it becomes something like that. Again, here there are 2 dimensions, there is one. The critical point is not in the line, but is more or less here. And one can follow very much in detail, and one can compute very detailed formulas for the stable manifold in all these parts. I mean, we have managed to do this using the classical invariant manifold theory for dynamical systems, and then we found a way to eliminate many computations using invariant manifold theory. But in any case, the key point is that in principle we can follow this manifold here, that at least when the q1, q2, sorry about that, I was connected to the... Okay, as I was telling, I mean, in this region, when q1, q2 are small, this is a kind of curve that, well, it's a kind of curve that we can approximate very well. And we can study very well this four-dimensional picture in the limit when theta is small. I mean, if theta is small and theta is large in both cases, I mean, we can see how is the dependence on theta of this picture that I am plotting here. And then, well, this is the critical point. In the limit theta going to 0, the manifold is basically vertical. This stable manifold is basically vertical. This is the point where we want to go. This is the point where we are trying to go. In the limit when theta goes to infinity, this manifold, I mean, it folds in this way. I mean, it tries to come in this way, it folds, and I hope that you can see this in the picture. It becomes something like that. I mean, this manifold becomes something that is very flat and is trying to approach to the plane where Q1, Q2 are identically equal to 0. And then, I mean, it's clear that you have to cross the point in the middle. I mean, doing that, you have to cross the point in the middle. I mean, of course, one has to do the things more carefully, but this is the basic argument. And I mean, the main technical difficulty is that one has to study very carefully this ODE, one has to prove many technical lemmas to see how the trajectories are moving and how they are evolving, but it can be made. I mean, eventually, then you can do this type of argument, and this allows you, by means of this shooting, to show that this trajectory really exists. Okay, well, in general relativity, one has to be careful because with the singularities, because very often the singularities are not true singularities. The singularities in many cases are just coordinate singularities. I mean, in many cases the singularities are just a problem that happens for the coordinates. For instance, this happens during black hole formation in Schwarzschild coordinates, where in reality there is not a true singularity. You can cross perfectly the horizon without finding anything strange from the physical point of view, but where the coordinates are becoming very bad and you have to do something with them. And then one has to really check that the singularities are true singularities. But in general relativity there are tools for doing that. There is something that is called the Kretschmann scalar, that is basically some kind of trace of the curvature tensor, and it is possible to show that, I mean, this is more or less classical in general relativity, that it is bounded in this particular way, where this is the thing that is called the Hawking mass, that is I mean, in this particular similar case scales in this specific way. And then sorry with this mess. Okay. Then the point is that the thing that we show in this way is that the coordinate is not a real, I mean, it's not a coordinate singularity, it's a true singularity because the curvature becomes infinity. I mean, and this is a test in general relativity for having true singularities, is to have that the curvature becomes infinity. I mean, you can see that in the self-similar variables, this is of order 1, this scales like r, and then this goes like r to the 4, r to the 6, this is singular when r goes to 0. I mean, there are true singularities in that region, and it's not just a coordinate problem. Okay, let me go on. Some other comments. Well, the question is if we can use this to say something about the cosmic censorship hypothesis, and the answer is no at the moment. No, at least at the moment we cannot say much, because the problem is that this solution is not really becoming a flat Minkowski space asymptotically at infinity. I mean, this solution, I mean, the thing that happens with this solution is that it is describing a region that is inside a light cone. I mean, you can make a plot of the light rays that are arriving to the singularity. You can make a plot for them, and they look something. I mean, the thing that some people here will call double null coordinates will be something like this, and the singularity is contained inside this region. And if you try to, this is the center, and you try to go here the distance is infinity. And if the space is asymptotically flat, the infinity should be, I mean, outside the light cone. I mean, the infinity should be outside the light cone because the singularity should be hidden inside the light cones. I mean, and I think that this is normal, but this is something that we see. I mean, that this solution is not matching with the Minkowski space because you cannot do that with self-similar variables. To be able to obtain something that is solving the cosmic censorship hypothesis, you have to move away from self-similar variables. But the hope is that maybe this can be made using perturbations of these self-similar solutions, because this can be made in many other much simpler geometrical problems, like mean curvature flow or problems like that, where you can somehow localize or focalize the singularities. But at least directly we cannot do a gluing, something that is common in general relativity. We cannot glue this space-time that we obtain here with a Minkowski flat space outside. And this will require much more analysis. I mean, it will require basically try to understand what happens if you are close to this self-similar solution and try to make perturbations of it. And well, now let me comment a little bit about the results by Gundlach and Martin Garcia. They also studied self-similar solutions for the Blasov-Einstein system. In principle, they were not looking for solutions concentrated in surfaces. They wanted to study fully dispersive solutions, I mean, with dispersion in all the different directions of the space. But they have a different rescaling group, and this is the major difference between their approach and our approach. In their approach, they do not assume that the density of particles in the phase space is constant. I mean, they assume that it is rescaling also, and therefore the singularity is a bit strange. I mean, it's something that where the singularity somehow is coming from the past. Something that you can see, and this is very different in our case and in their case, is that their solution is singular along the light cone. I mean, if you go to the light cone that is approaching to the singularity, the solution has very strong singularities here, and this doesn't happen in our case. And in some sense, the thing that you see, I was talking very much with Jose Maria Martin Garcia about this solution. I have been talking with him a lot about this, the relations and the difference between both solutions. And in their case, the thing that they are doing is that they are considering, in some sense, something that I would call small perturbations of the Minkowski space. In some sense, their solutions are something like this. It's not exactly like this, but will be very much like the flat solutions, slightly perturbed. The thing that they do is that they use a perturbative procedure, and they formulate the problem as a set of integral differential equations, and they solve them numerically. But the solutions, and this is something that for Jose Maria was rather clear, the solutions in some sense are in some sense close to Minkowski space. It is true that numerically they are able to arrive to numbers of parameters of order 1, but still is something that only is convergent if you don't have too much mass in the system. And this is probably the major difference between their approach and our approach. In our approach, we are finding an eigenvalue. We have to put sufficiently amount of mass in the system to be able to see something that is nonlinear and that is not looking like a Minkowski space at infinity. It's probably it's different, but I suspect that there is something like that in Blasov-Poisson. Even in the classical Blasov-Poisson system, I suspect that there is something like that. I suspect that if in Blasov-Poisson, in the radial case, you throw particles towards the interior, and there are very fat tails at infinity, I suspect that one can create singularities. And in some sense, this is similar. Somehow they are sending singularities towards the center, even if they have some angular momentum, but the problem is that the particles cannot move faster than the speed of light. And for that reason, they are concentrated along the light cone. Somehow they are singular along the light cone for that reason, because the particles cannot move in the relativistic setting faster than the light. However, in Blasov-Poisson, this will be possible, and I think that will be probably the best analogy to send many particles from very far away from Blasov-Poisson to a very large velocity towards the center. Now let me, some little comment about the thing that is called generalized Einstein clusters, because there could be some connections with it's not the same, but we wanted to see the difference. In general relativity, there is something that are called the generalized Einstein clusters, and they were studied. The Einstein clusters were some kind of stationary solutions that have this kind of dust-like structure that I said before. This type of dust structure that I mentioned, where at a given radius, you only have one velocity and one angular momentum at a given particular radius. And these generalized Einstein clusters was some kind of dynamical version of the Einstein clusters, and were studied by Bondi and Data, who are well-known experts. They were very famous people in the field of general relativity, and in particular Bondi. And in that way, they can reduce the evolution of the system to a system of ordinary differential equations. The system becomes some kind of system of ODEs, but there is a big difference between these clusters and the solutions that we have. And the main difference is that in our case, if we are at a given radius, we have two velocities, one velocity going inside and one velocity going outside. And in the case of generalized Einstein clusters, you only will have one. For any radius, you will have only one velocity. And then I was looking with Alan very carefully what will happen very close to the central radius, and we got the conclusion that since there is no field here, since there is no matter, nothing is attracting the matter, and if you try to do some kind of smoothing or regularization, try to transform these measures in something a bit spread, that is not to do some kind of smoothing of the measures, these things could not approach to the origin. It will be impossible for these things to approach to the origin unless the angular momentum is 0, but then you will not have dispersion in the angular momentum either. And then the point is that I think that the major difference is that in this case, thanks to the fact that we have a way of having particles entering and having particles leaving, there is a way of concentrating the mass and creating a very big field inside that is trying to trap everything and producing a singularity. While in this particular case, it will not be possible to do that. In this case, it will not be possible. But these solutions are, in some sense, even less dispersive than ours, because the manifold where they are concentrated has codimension 2, ours has codimension 1, but in any case, we believe that these things cannot be used to produce a singularity near the origin, because at least for fully dispersive Blasov-Poisson. Because the problem is that you don't have entering particles and leaving particles. That is the advantage that we have here. And if you study what is happening at the closest particle and you try to see how this particle should move, if you try to smooth out that, nothing gets attracted because there is no matter inside, and then it's not possible. But here this is not the case. Here these particles are getting attracted. The particles that are the closest to this origin are just changing because this is completely dynamic, and then there is a way of creating a singularity. This is the major difference with the case of Einstein clusters. Okay, and finally let me conclude. Well, there are things that we are looking and work for the future. One of the questions that at the moment I think that is not, I thought for a while that was, I think that this is going to be a hard but technical problem basically, is not to have solutions concentrated in measures, but somehow try to thicken them. Try to have solutions that are fully dispersive, trying to do perturbations of that. it is possible to do some asymptotics. You get many boundary edges. I mean, probably more boundary edges that I have seen before, but in any case, it is possible to, in principle, formally to see that you can smooth out these functions. And I think this is more or less clear at the level of asymptotics, not the rigorous proof, but at the level of asymptotics, this is possible. The main problem is this. I mean, the main problem will be try to see if one can somehow glue the solution. I mean, if it is possible to do some kind of matching of the solution with a flat Minkowski space, because this will provide true information for the problem of the cosmic censorship. I mean, it will show that for this model of matter, that in some sense is more realistic than the scalar model that has been considered by many people, there are singularities. I mean, there are naked singularities that do imply a black hole formation, and of course one should study stability and all this kind of stuff. But the problem with that is, as I mentioned before, is that if we want to do that, we have to move away from the cell-similar solutions. I mean, it is not possible to do this with the cell-similar solutions, and then you have to consider perturbations of that. I mean, I tried to write the equations some time ago, but they were really awful, but now I understand much better what is happening in this solution, and then maybe there will be some hope of trying to do something in this direction. But at the moment, the thing that we have is this particular cell-similar solution, and the question will be to see if the perturbation of this cell-similar solution allows to build a space-time that is matching with Minkowski at infinity. And finally, well, as at the beginning we threw away the mass of the particles, we assume that the mass of the particles at rest was equal to 0. Again, to introduce then will move us away from the cell-similar setting, but away this should be a small correction. This will be something perturbative that in principle should not be much harder than that. I think that the really relevant point is this. This is really the relevant thing that will be important to clarify. And we are looking something in this direction to see what can be made. Okay, what did we get in then here? Well, we prove that there exists this kind of dust-like, that means concentrated in some hypersurfaces, self-similar solutions for the massless Blasov-Einstein model. The key idea that we have used is to play a little bit with the measures, with the densities, and with the equations, and reduce the problem to a four-dimensional dynamical system, and then to use tools of dynamical systems and singular perturbations to study it in detail. Then, I mean, it's possible to obtain, at least formally, this kind of asymptotic expansions that show that these measures can be thickened, I mean, and they can be transformed in fully dispersive solutions, but for the moment this is formal, and I would like to understand what is the mathematical structure that lies inside better, because the computations are really very ugly, and it will be convenient to have some more robust tool for doing this kind of thickening procedure. Then, of course, this is the related question, how to do this in a rigorous level, and the main problem is to see if it is possible to match these equations, and how to match these equations with the Minkowski space-time, making a perturbation of the cell-similar solution and trying to do that at infinity. I mean, I have seen and I know how to do these kind of things in much simpler problems, for instance, in mean curvature flow or in problems like that, but I mean, this is general relativity, and there are some analogies, but there are also some differences. There are many analogies with some singularities in mean curvature flow where you get the formation of cones. I mean, you get some kind of cone formation. In some dimensions, there are self-similar solutions that are concentrated to cones, and later you can modify the external part, basically doing some kind of analysis of the stability and showing that the outer part does not count very much. But of course, here the questions are more complicated, and the analysis of these cones in the case of mean curvature flow, well, it's just a second-order system of ODEs that is much easier. But this one, even at this level, is much more complicated. And I think that I will finish here. Thank you for your attention.